Started, and I am just going to share my screen. What am I sharing? Was I sharing the slides there? Right on. All right. My technical confusion is now on the recording. How is it the end of 2024 already? How these last 4 months have flown by during this series where we've geared up for advocacy in 2025 and beyond. We will say this again at the end of the call, but just want to say how much your participation means to us. We know it's not easy. You all have many things that demand your attention, and to spend your time with us every month is humbling. We promise to continue to work hard, as we know you are all working hard, to continue to co-construct this movement together, as we have done throughout this year and will continue to do next year and in the many years after that. The advocacy pathways that we have been building toward together are so important, whether we plan to advocate for a programmatic change within a community organization or plan to advocate for policy at the highest levels of government. These efforts are important and connected within the broader movement that each of these actions helps to build. We have learned so much from you all as we have gone through this series. I know I continue to learn and reflect on how we can build in the years to come, and we will get to some of that later in the call. But rather than waiting until the end, I wanted to start today's call with our sincere gratitude and love for all of you. On today's call, we will do an overview of the key activities and takeaways from the first 3 sessions, and we know that this will be review for many of you, though not all, and want to ensure that all of the considerations we have been developing throughout this series are top of mind when we make our plans for the year ahead. I want to note that I continue to say that we will be making a plan for 2025, but for some of us, especially those who are planning to advocate at the state level, we may have a plan that is just 2 months long, as perhaps your state's legislative session is only 2 months. Perhaps you are advocating at a state level, but think that it will take some time to generate the buy-in necessary. So you are going to develop a 2 or 3 year plan instead of just a plan for 2025. If you have a long-term plan like that, keep in mind that we want to break it down to short and intermediate term goals, but I mentioned that and we'll reiterate it again, that these plans are yours, and do not take my saying 2025 as though it is just constrained to being exactly only the 12 months ahead in 2025. After we have some time to research and process our plans, we will do breakouts, as we have done the last couple of calls. For folks who would prefer to continue doing independent work during this time, you will be able to do that as well. And then we have some exciting news for new ways we plan to support our growing network of advocates in the years ahead. At the end of the call, for those who want to stay, we will open up the floor for some discussion before closing the session, and we'll look forward to continuing to build upon this work with you all in the new year. The first month's call in the series, way back in September, was about meeting the moment with trauma-informed advocacy. You can scan the QR code for that whole call, and we will also post the link to the call in the chat. But we first set the foundation for our why, establishing that we need to be trauma-informed in our approaches to advocacy because we are navigating a climate rife with various forms of collective trauma perpetuated by collective denial and disturbance. I will quickly define these 5 terms as well as ways that we can be trauma-informed in our approaches to advocacy. We will put a link in the chat to a report that goes deeper into these concepts now, called Restoring Wholeness. Collective trauma may be the result of a single event, the blow to the basic tissue of social life in Erickson's definition, but is often the chronic stress that, while gathering force slowly and insidiously, generates a gradual realization that the community no longer exists as an effective source of support. As Erickson goes on to describe, when collective trauma occurs and is unresolved, often I continue to exist, though damaged and maybe even permanently changed. You continue to exist, though distant and hard to relate to, but we no longer exist as a connected pair or as linked cells in a larger communal body. Smelser's definition of culture as a system necessitates the linkage among those whom it is comprised of. So Erickson's discussion about the impact of collective trauma, at least when it is unresolved, deteriorates culture itself. Unlike the insidiousness of collective trauma, a cultural trauma refers to an invasive and overwhelming event that is believed to undermine or overwhelm one or several essential ingredients of a culture or the culture as a whole. Three things that occur in qualifying as a cultural trauma are: it must be remembered or made to be remembered. The memory must be made culturally relevant, that is represented as obliterating, damaging, or rendering problematic something sacred, usually a value or outlook felt to be essential for the integrity of the affected society. And three, the memory must be associated with a strong negative affect, such as disgust or shame. Smeltzer explains that the important defining characteristic of cultural traumas is that the affected arenas are society's social structures. A claim of traumatic cultural damage must be established by deliberate efforts on the part of cultural carriers. Political influence in cultural traumas cannot be overstated. Politics often has influence over the creation of cultural traumas and can also continue to leverage the allegiance and/or paralysis that the cultural trauma elicits, and are in many ways responsible for the trauma vortex that perpetuates. It is nearly impossible to talk about collective and cultural trauma without also talking about historical trauma, for which we will use Yellow Horse Braveheart's definition. Historical trauma is a cumulative emotional and psychological wounding over the lifespan and across generations emanating from massive group trauma. Historical unresolved grief accompanies that trauma. The historical trauma response is a constellation of features in reaction to massive group traumas. This historical unresolved grief and the historical trauma response perpetuates divides and creates an us versus them mentality, which makes it difficult to move toward a better future collectively. We need to work in the efforts of creating a sense of belonging for everyone to see and hear people, really trying to understand their perspectives and views on the world in order to remend how our society has frayed so that we can move forward together. It feels as though we are moving in many ways, and has for some time, in the opposite of this direction, which collective denial helps to explain. Alexander and co-authors understand that social groups can, and often do, refuse to recognize the existence of others' trauma, and because of their failure, they cannot achieve a moral stance. All sides tend to deflect responsibility of the issue to the other and fail to recognize or address their perpetuation of the collective and cultural traumas that we are experiencing as a whole society. Perhaps we are experiencing them through different lenses, but we are all experiencing them nonetheless. This collective denial leads social groups to restrict solidarity, leaving others to suffer alone. In complex groups, we are all someone else's other. So we all wind up, at least to some extent, suffering alone and isolating from the collective whole. If we take this definition and combine it back with Erickson's definition of collective trauma, where we no longer exist as a connected pair or as linked cells in a larger communal body, we can see how this creates a vicious cycle. We take our definition of collective disturbance from CTIPP founder and former chair Sandy Bloom. When we can't, or at least don't, sufficiently acknowledge these broad social issues that influence all of us, collective disturbances emerge. A collective disturbance can be defined as a situation where a strong emotion becomes disconnected from its original source and becomes attached to unrelated events or interactions. Our society, as a result of the multitude of unresolved collective and cultural traumas, which are exacerbated and perpetuated by collective denial and disturbances, becomes trapped. We not only punish ourselves, but as our ancestors have done to us, we promote that same punishment upon future generations. We can be the generation that truly begins the process of deep healing that will help bring about collective post-traumatic growth and post-traumatic wisdom that are only possible by developing an honest narrative about what has happened that is shared broadly, and working to integrate better ways of thinking, being, doing, knowing, and relating that accept responsibility for at least some part of what has happened. The way that we are going to be able to be that generation is by engaging in trauma-informed advocacy as we unapologetically promote trauma-informed policies and practices. A core principle of a trauma-informed approach is empowerment, voice, and choice. This means that a trauma-informed advocate does not try to force people to think a certain way necessarily. We work to present irrefutable information, of course. We are trying to make positive change happen in the world around us, unapologetically so. But we also respect that others have the right to voice, choice, and empowerment. We understand that everyone has their own sets of environments, experiences, and interpretations that shape the lenses through which they see themselves and the world around them. And we approach that with curiosity and compassion rather than judgment and shame as best as we can. This allows us to develop the relationships that are necessary to change the hearts and minds of those who we are advocating to and those we, whether now or in the future, will advocate alongside, which helps model the model as building healthy relationships is a fundamental part of our movement. In order to do this, we must be aware of and process our own biases, understand how our own experiences may show up and impact our ability to really be present and accepting of others. And while the expectation is never to be perfect in this approach, as we recognize that being trauma-informed requires a commitment to ongoing process of learning and growth, we must be willing to critically examine our tendencies to make space that creates conditions of empowerment and safety, another principle of being trauma-informed, so that others may do the same. This movement is not only for some people or some communities. This movement is for everyone. Of course, we must also take care of ourselves, so we must hold boundaries that keep our values and well-being intact as we move forward. But holding these tensions is the work that we do. There are a lot of people who believe in the trauma-informed movement and want to be part of it today. So we can focus our energies where there is opportunity while holding space for others to join as time moves forward. As this movement continues to grow, we can build bigger umbrellas while not compromising on our values. Agenda setting starts with the identification of a problem, or at least an opportunity for improvement, just in case there is something in your mind you are considering addressing that you may not define as a problem but can still be improved upon. We went through the problem and solution tree activity you see on this slide that is also being put in the chat to help with this, where you will find prompts for consideration in the 4 boxes that take us from problem identification to root cause drivers to consideration of barriers that may come up to our proposed solutions. This slide is from the second module of the asynchronous advocacy series that's available on our website, done by Whitney Maris a couple years ago, and is a great place to go deeper if you are interested, as it is a wonderful complement to the process we have gone through in this CTIPP CAN series. We're going to talk more about this later in the presentation, but you can also find more on this in the ebook that we just published as well. You see here that agenda setting is where the policy process begins and returns throughout its iterative development. This will help set us up for policy design itself and the implementation and review of our advocacy efforts, which then gets us back to agenda setting as we continue to learn and grow throughout this process. I've said it before and I will say it again. Advocacy, policy, and practice change are iterative processes. While phases of plans have beginning and ends, there is not really an end in social change and social justice efforts. As we engage constituents and implement, we will find that there are elements that can always be improved upon. As I always say, trauma-informed policy and practice requires an ongoing commitment to learning and growth. This LASSO is an acronym that can help us frame our problem statements, which you may consider using as you go through the issue solution tree from a couple slides ago. We want to make sure that our problem statements are limited in scope. If there's a multi-pronged initiative, then it might be helpful to have multiple problem statements that can be brought together instead of just having one single giant issue. If there is an action that can be taken on the problem that we are highlighting, we want to make sure here that there is clarity in how our problem statement is worded. Will others support this work we are proposing? Whether you have engaged other potential partners in this work or just identified potential groups, it is an important element. And who owns the problem and the solution? We want to make sure that there is someone or a group of people who are able to take accountability and action for the problem that we are working to resolve, and that equity and justice are considered in this ownership of the problem. So as we think about the problem statement, I know that many of you have already created one, Beyond just framing provided by the Lasso framework, we want to consider ways that we can frame the problem that make the solution we are proposing even more obvious. It can be effective if we lean into existing strengths, what is strong with instead of just what is wrong with, as we promote solutions that can make things better. And we want to be specific while having the clarity to not need to get too granular to help others understand why the solution we are proposing will make a meaningful difference. These are important considerations as we develop our advocacy agenda, and this slide is in Module 3, and again, Chapter 3 of the ebook will have more on that. And finally, the last session that we were in last month, when telling our stories for advocacy, we want to lead with our why, for why our advocacy is important as best as we can. This helps us reach people's hearts, and from there we can inform their minds by adding the how and what of our advocacy as the story we are telling continues. As we organize our story by talking about the purpose, followed by the process, and then the result or results that we anticipate. Different contexts and environments call for different types of storytelling. Elevator speeches should be clear and concise. While the elevator speech planning tool that the QR code and link that was put in the chat will take you says that you can create an elevator speech of up to 2 minutes, please keep in mind that this includes specific information about who we are meeting with. So if you want to develop a general elevator speech, that works well, and I encourage you to do that somewhere between 30 to 60 seconds so that you can add on to that with other information specific to who you are pitching at any given time. And it is also always helpful to have that in your back pocket if there is ever a time you just need to have a quick description of what you are working on. And per our discussion on the last slide, of course, why we are advocating as well. The story of self, story of us, story of now framework is a longer narrative framework that allows for us to share information about ourselves and why this is so important to us. And just to mention, we don't always need to advocate because something went wrong. It can be very powerful to advocate about what went right for us as well, which then leads to the reasons that what we are advocating for are important to society beyond just ourselves, and why now is the time to take action. This framework is adaptable, and I have used it in as short in a meeting as 5 minutes before, as well as for presentations as long as 75 minutes. And you can find the worksheet for that in the chat. So now, after that review, taking our trauma-informed advocacy approaches combined with our advocacy agendas and storytelling, we have the framework to develop a plan for moving forward in 2025 and beyond. Before we fully develop our plan, we want to take some time to dive into what level we are looking to advocate to, and then we will discuss the different considerations for the different groups we can advocate to. For many, though not all, advocacy agendas, we will likely have multiple prongs to our plan, but we still want to break it down in our plans who we are advocating to at what times and a plan for each. As I go through the coming slides, I invite you all to do research and write and plan as we talk about some of these key considerations. To start, this chart breaks down who and what exists under each branch of government, including what work takes place outside of the government for those who decide to advocate to non-governmental organizations, as well as the different bodies that exist within each branch at the federal, state, and local levels. When we think about our advocacy targets, we need to understand what we are advocating for and who we are trying to impact in what ways, which is why we started with our problem solution trees in developing our advocacy agendas back in October, so that when we look at this chart, we will be able to consider who needs to be partnered in addressing the problem and implementing our proposed solutions. I recognize that some folks may already know who they want to advocate to, at least to start, and maybe entirely, while others may not know yet. There can be a desire for many to want to advocate at the federal level, as this feels like it is the highest level to make the greatest impact, perhaps. I would caution against this type of thinking. There are good reasons to advocate at the federal level, and we will talk about the legislation and agency work that CTIPP focuses on at the federal level later in this presentation, as well as into next year. But there are also incredible challenges to advocating at the federal level. The partisan gridlock is no secret, and while it is not exclusively a problem at the federal level, the gridlock that has been experienced federally makes advocacy around certain issues incredibly difficult. Additionally, for consideration, as gridlock has grown at the federal level, states and municipalities have actually become more powerful. This does not mean that we should not pursue the federal level if that is what we are called to do, but we should be realistic in our expectations if this is what we choose to do. And we will talk more about taking care of ourselves through this process, which realistic expectations fits into. Another thing to mention about the federal level is that in addition to my earlier comments about states and municipalities being more powerful, there are certain things that the federal government is not the most powerful entity to advocate around. A good example of this is education. Each state has tremendous amount of autonomy over its education policy. The federal government can create grants to try and incentivize action within schools through the Department of Education, but the power is really at the state level with their departments of education and with local education agencies for most educational advocacy. Depending on your issue, check what level has the most influence if you're not sure. And depending on where you have the most influence, if there is a lot at a local level, it can be a powerful strategy to get legislation passed and implemented at a local level to then scale. Imagine if you live in a town and get a piece of legislation passed. You can then draw attention to it from your state and federal legislators to introduce and pass a similar bill if there is such an opportunity to coordinate and align across levels of government. There is power in educational advocacy and playing the long game, even if the passage of our priorities may not occur in the near future. But again, we just want to develop realistic expectations. Of course, there may also be reason to advocate outside of the government for change altogether. Perhaps you want to see an honest integration of trauma-informed approaches into an organization's existing services. Or perhaps you want to see CTIPP as an organization have a new program offering, and you want to advocate to us in support of expansion of the trauma-informed movement. We are not here to tell you what you should advocate for in the year to come, but want to create the movement that we are all advocating in similar ways. There are many ways that trauma-informed advocacy can take shape, and there can also be elements of a single strategy. Later in this call, I will break down my own plans for you all for working at the federal, state, local, and non-governmental levels in the year and years ahead, and how these fit together as an example. What is important in developing our plans is thinking through what level or levels we need to involve to move our work forward. As we begin to develop our plans of action, the following considerations may be helpful. When we know who we need to advocate to in order to move our proposal forward, there are a few steps that we should take. First of all, what are their interests and do they align with our own? If the person you need to advocate to just ran for office in the most recent election cycle that was ended last month, then what did they run on? What promises did they make before they take office? Does our proposal advance their existing agenda in any way? It's all right if it's not the case, but it can be powerful if it is. Additionally, who are their constituents and stakeholders? Even if what we are proposing does not totally align with their existing agendas, does it meet a need for a piece of or their entire constituency? Is there evidence or are there enough voices that can join alongside our own to show that this matters to their districts and their voters? I know that at times, especially in America, it can seem like money is the most important thing in politics sometimes. But money is only good insofar as it leads to votes for people in elected office. So if enough constituents join in advocacy, whether that be a sign-on letter, calling the office, or some other measure, this illustrates that their voters care about this issue and want them to take action on it. Additionally, before getting back to connecting with other advocates, I also want to mention that money is still very important in politics in the United States, and it may be worth checking if there are donors to the elected officials or businesses within their district that can advocate along your side, as this can help pull a lot of weight. Beyond just advocating to elected officials, building a network of advocates around you can also be very helpful. Are there others who care about your issue? If so, and I am sure that there are, it may be worth taking some time to not just advocate directly to those we need to move toward action, but also build a coalition of advocates. As a side benefit, that also helps to increase connection and maintain our own well-being through relationships as we continue through the process. As we were just discussing, there is incredible strength in numbers. Conversations with friends and family about how we are working on and what we are working on can generate support from our closest network. Social media can create wonderful opportunities for outreach that can help us meet new people as well. As more people join, it makes it easier for others to join in as well. But most importantly, we want for our group of advocates, no matter what size, to march to the beat of the same drum. It's more important to have the right message than necessarily just a ton of people. But where these two meet, it's incredibly powerful. And we will get into this more, but as we develop our plans, we should build in opportunities that take care of ourselves and be mindful about our own capacity, and in a coalition, the capacity and well-being of others as well. We must make sure that we are taking care of ourselves and each other so that we have the energy to continue moving forward in this journey that we are on. We talk a lot about modeling the model. And like we discussed in the first session of this series, that means that we must be mindful of our own needs. You deserve the same care that you are advocating for others to have. You matter, and you deserve to feel that sense of belonging and mattering that our movement continues to fight for. We say frequently here at CTIPP that being part of the trauma-informed commitment is a commitment to an ongoing process of learning and growth. We are all different, and what we need will be different as we journey to take care of ourselves. Yet we can also share in supporting one another and holding accountability for the things we practice to love ourselves as we work to take care of others and the world around us. In this work, we will undoubtedly face situations and stories that impact us and others deeply. As we continue in our journey, we model the model by practicing the 4 R's of trauma-informed care, including resisting re-traumatization, both for ourselves and others. We lead with curiosity and compassion rather than judgment and shame, and work to create space to discuss how we are continuing to move forward. Check-ins that are critical to keep ourselves honest in this work, which we will talk about more in a bit as we organize CTIPP CAN in 2025 to make space for this connection. As we work to take care of ourselves, we will continue to learn the things that help and hurt to enable long-term action as we make progress, reflect on strengths and weaknesses, and continue to develop this growing movement in the many ways we need. As we develop our plans, having a timeline to keep us accountable in our process is critical. As with any timeline, considering any deadlines that might impact our work is important. Some advocacy may not have hard deadlines, while for others there may be, and they could be influenced by different factors. If you're advocating at the local level, perhaps you want to get a bill introduced before budget conversations begin. If you're advocating at the state level, perhaps you are in a state that has a short legislative session, and that is the timeline that you were on. If you're advocating at the federal level, perhaps you want the bill perhaps you want someone to take action on a bill before the end of Congress, which as of next month would be in 2 years. There are a number of potential ways to set deadlines. And as we are just discussing in terms of taking care of ourselves, we want to be reasonable in setting deadlines. Deadlines create stress. Stress itself is not necessarily a bad thing. Healthy stress keeps us alert and moving. A good deadline can keep things moving along better than it otherwise may have. If we set deadlines that are too long, though, maybe we become lackadaisical. If we set deadlines that are too ambitious, it can become toxically stressful and decrease the likelihood of our following through, either with the quality we need or at all. So be reasonable, yet assertive, recognizing that while we don't want to change our plans too much, you can always adjust as we learn and grow throughout the journey. So we want to do our best effort to put a good foot forward in creating realistic plans that we can stick to. In addition to setting deadlines and benchmarks for our plans, we want to see what other partners are already involved or could be and make plans to engage with them as well. It can be easy to get so focused on the main target of our advocacy that we can lose sight of the people and groups of people we can bring around us that help to strengthen our advocacy to that key target. It takes a bit more work up front, but can reduce the work on us all alone while improving the outcome overall. As that famous proverb goes, if you want to go far, or if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. While not all advocacy may need this, as sometimes more people can create more moving parts and confusion when it just doesn't need that, a lot of times it can help in advocacy efforts because, as mentioned before, there is strength in numbers. And finally, when we're talking about our plans, we need to think about how we will allocate resources. Of course, money is a regular thing to think about when we talk about allocation of resources. And if you are funded for this work or are trying to fundraise for work, then budgeting for funding is necessary. But money is not the only resource that we need to be mindful of. Our time and our energy are the most valuable resources that we have. And budgeting these resources is also critical, particularly as we consider how we will maintain our own well-being. I know that I continue to harp on this, but it's important. In modeling the model, we must take care of ourselves. If we do not plan for our own well-being, it can too easily become an afterthought. In a movement that is about promoting well-being, we must be mindful to work toward wellness ourselves. Throughout this series, I have been sharing about my work with the Love Act, a piece of legislation that I developed and am working to get passed and implemented in Philadelphia. In a bit, I will share a 10-minute presentation developed that brings together the key elements of the legislation, its purpose, and strategy. This legislation at the local level is one key piece of advocacy strategy for the year ahead. If anybody in the audience has been hearing me talk about the development of the Love Act for the last 6 months, as I first presented on it at June CTIPP CAN call, and are thinking, how has this thing not passed yet? You talk about it all the time. Believe me, I'm with you. For anyone who's been following Philadelphia politics, the 76ers, the city's basketball team, are trying to move their arena into Center City. The final vote for that is likely to be approved tomorrow, and it was a contentious battle with a lot of process. So while I have had many informational meetings about the Love Act, from the beginning, folks said that it would likely need to wait until 2025 to be introduced. Now that we are almost at 2025, I find myself grateful in many ways for the meetings and time that I had to incubate these ideas further, and I'm excited to hit the ground running in the new year, supported by elements developed recently, like you will see in the coming slides. I am also working to promote an agenda that we call the full press at the state level, starting in Pennsylvania in the year ahead. To create an organization at the state level, or a vision rather, organizations already exist, but a vision for the state that supports community-led trauma-informed coalitions throughout the Commonwealth while setting up an infrastructure to measure and capture cost avoidance to sustain and scale returns on investment in this work over time. There are multiple elements to this strategy, but it's not a legislative one at this point, but rather an administrative effort in partnership with HEAL PA, which is a statewide trauma-informed initiative that operates out of the governor's office. A big goal for the year ahead is to plan my capstone paper, which will focus on specifics of the agenda and how it can work in the state, branching all the way down into communities through the grassroots, but connected across all levels of government. Additionally, at the federal level, we at CTIPP will continue to focus on working to promote the Community Mental Wellness and Resilience Act and the Rise from Trauma Act in Congress. While we would love to see these pieces of legislation pass, and we have hope that they will, we believe that it is critical to mobilize around these because we have an opportunity to prove that by garnering growing support in this Congress and this administration that was just elected, we can disarm the threats to the trauma-informed movement, that somehow trauma-informed care is partisan in some way, which we have been saying is not true. And now there is an opportunity to prove that this is not true by making progress. Additionally, I continue to advocate outside of the government as well by doing these calls and more, connection with advocates and organizations across the country to join in with advocacy efforts to help grow the movement. I share this for a number of examples of how we can get involved at multiple levels, not for a point of comparison or to say that anyone needs to do all of this, as I recognize my privilege in getting to have this work be a part of my job that not everybody does right now. But it is still a lot to balance and let alone with my other responsibilities. And so another part of the work that I have been engaged in is continuing to pursue sustainable ways to find balance. I have found that working across all of these levels help me find balance in a broader strategy to coordinate and align across levels of government. Additionally, I have started to establish strategies that allow me to remain whole through this work. 3 big and intentional changes that I have made this year that have been helpful in doing this are: 1, every morning, the first thing I do when I wake up is I pray, thinking deeply about what I want for the day and my long-term goals, hopes, and dreams, and being intentional and mindful about connecting with myself and the world around me has been helpful. 2, a shift I have made is that I have started to consider diet and exercise parts of my professional work. Now, considering this means that I am working more, often around 80 hours a week, but it has ensured that I have been able to take better care of myself. And 3, I keep a daily journal that encourages, and perhaps forces is actually the better word to use here, reflection on what I accomplished and learned each day and each week, and set goals for each week and multiple months at a time as well. I will continue to develop and refine these strategies that promote holistic well-being as I continue in this work, but I'm happy to share the strategies that I have found work so far. As I mentioned on the last slide, this presentation, and this will be the last thing before we get into breakout rooms, brings together a lot of what we have been working on through this series since September, combining the issue and solution tree, the elevator speech, and trauma-informed advocacy principles that we have been discussing, as well as some of the high-level plan moving forward and background in support of the Love Act. This presentation is the culmination of a semester's worth of work with my classmates, Maria, Chris, and Carmen, in our public management and leadership class, and this presentation was our final project. I am grateful to them for agreeing to allow the Love Act to be the policy that we worked on throughout this semester, and for their support for this work. It has helped the work move forward than I could have done alone. Trauma and its myriad consequences. Before I get started, I just want to recognize that I know that this is going to be a review for many of you, but it is the 10-minute presentation that we have put together for elected officials in Philadelphia that bring together all of the points that we have been talking throughout this whole series. Trauma and its myriad consequences are a wicked problem that our society is grappling with. The roots and leaves of the tree are interconnected, where you see issues like substance misuse and violence that are both the causes and effects of trauma, which create a trauma vortex in which trauma begets more trauma. To spell this example out further, in the original Adverse Childhood Experience, or ACE study, participants with 4 or more ACEs were more than 1,000% more likely to participate in intravenous drug use and 700% more likely to become an alcoholic. At the same time, growing up with someone in the household with substance abuse itself is an ACE. This shows how these issues are interconnected and intergenerational. There are a multitude of other causes, including structural racism and other forms of oppression, as well as other effects that lead to lost productivity and missed potential. At the end of the day, the problems that we are working to address at the root cause is that trauma leads to poor public health outcomes across the dimensions of behavioral health, mental health, and physical health. Philadelphia must address the root causes of trauma as it ranks high among cities in the United States in terms of both gun-related fatalities and drug overdose deaths. We know that trauma is a root cause driver for these and other issues. Now, we recognize that there is a tremendous amount of investment from the city already to address these issues. However, currently we are seeing primarily a treatment approach to the problem, which is necessary but insufficient to turn the tide on the issue long term. We need a public health approach. Philadelphia must address and work to prevent the root cause drivers of substance misuse, violence, and other intractable problems that our city is facing. As we look at what drives these outcomes in the city, we must explore and acknowledge the impacts of structural racism. In the middle of this slide, you will see a redlining map of Philadelphia from the 1930s, where the city intentionally divested in the neighborhoods through racist real estate policies and practices that have promoted intergenerational poverty and trauma and its various consequences. On the left, you see a present-day heat map of where gun violence is most prevalent in the city, and on the right, you will see where ACEs are most prevalent in the city, both of which overlap with the map of redlining in Philadelphia from almost a century ago. If we are going to create a healthier Philadelphia, healing trauma at its roots must be part of the solution. The Lowering Overdose and Violence Epidemics, or LOVE Act, does not get in the way of the city's current investments, but rather builds upon them with a two-part approach. The first is a new grant program to fund community-led trauma-informed coalitions at the neighborhood level within the city. The second is intergovernmental coordination across agencies and services to ensure that collaboration, which is a key principle of being trauma-informed, occurs. These two prongs together build upon some of the best trauma-informed policy work that we have seen across the country and allows Philadelphia to become a national leader through this innovative approach. The Family Policy Council in Washington State ran a program that has become known as Self-Healing Communities from 1994 to 2011. They created conditions of empowerment across the dozens of communities that they worked with throughout the state by combining a trauma-informed and systems-focused approach. As a result, they reduced many issues that were plaguing their state. In one county, they reduced youth suicide and suicide attempts by 98%, while simultaneously reducing high school dropout rates, juvenile justice system involvement, and birth-to-teen parents by around 50%, in addition to improving across a number of other issue areas. They accomplished this by addressing the root causes of trauma through a sustained community engagement strategy. As a result, they projected the cost avoidance of their work to state systems to be around $1.1 billion. This is a conservative estimate as it only looks at the impacts of a reduction of a few of the many outcomes achieved, but nonetheless, this was a greater than 35x return on investment. In addition to the learnings from self-healing communities, LOVE also builds off the Elijah Cumming Healing Cities Act that was passed in Baltimore in 2020, which legislates trauma-informed care throughout the city by ensuring collaboration across city agencies and services, and provides training across agencies throughout the city government. While at this time we do not have the benefit of long-term analysis of their work like we do with Washington's work, many promising outcomes are emerging, highlighted by their being awarded a Robert Wood Johnson Culture of Health Prize to study this work last year. There is a tremendous opportunity for the city of Philadelphia to build from this work and other promising policies and practices elsewhere and become a leader in trauma-informed policy and practice by passing the LOVE Act. By starting with a 3-year pilot supporting community-led trauma-informed coalitions in neighborhoods impacted by redlining, not forcing any neighborhood who does not wish, but creating opportunities for those who do want to participate in this pilot, the city can provide a relatively small investment in these communities, both in terms of funding, as you can see by the grants, as well as education and engagement provided by the staff and contracts, while also building interagency collaboration and capacity to measure the impacts of this work, which allow for the potential for it to sustain and scale beyond just a pilot project. The 3-year investment would be less than $10 million, and this money can be funded through city appropriations, opioid settlement funds through the Scattergood Foundation, who published a guidebook on trauma-informed philanthropy and are partners in this work, and other philanthropic dollars, or a combination of all of these. Though it would not pay immediately, there is also an opportunity to apply for the Social Impact Partnerships to Pay for Results Act, or SIPRA, which would refund the city on funds it spent if metrics are achieved. We will get to how this can be funded more long-term in a few slides. There are many potential structures for this to move forward, but we believe that a good potential framework is to start with an Office of Community Capacity within the existing Office of Public Safety in the mayor's office to lead this work. We must engage communities to help create solutions because each community has different populations, needs, resources, and desires, and community members will best be able to navigate and create solutions to address the root causes of the problems that exist in their neighborhoods. This honest partnership with the city also creates opportunities for greater engagement and trust in government, which can benefit other initiatives as well. While some neighborhoods may have to start from step one, others are already engaged in this process, yet lack the funding and support to scale their work and findings. And a great example of this is the Co-Creating Kensington plan that has been organized by the New Kensington Community Development Corporation and Impact Services through a community-driven and trauma-informed plan that has been in process since 2020. In meeting with some of their leaders, funding to do this type of systems level work, which is not often available from government or philanthropy, would enable them to more fully implement their findings and continue this process. We know that other such coalitions exist at some level in the city as well, and the Love Act creates an opportunity for them to learn from each other. The next 5 years have the following key milestones. Pass the Love Act in the next year and hire staff and set up contracts to fulfill the pilot. The 3-year pilot would then occur from 2026 to 2028, both in terms of grants and supports for community coalitions. And through the collaboration and measurement done during that time within the government, there is an opportunity to scale in 2029 and beyond to other parts of the city. As the city, community coalition, and other partners collaborate to measure on outcomes and learn from what is and is not working as we measure metrics around overdose deaths, violent crime, high school dropout rates, justice system involvement, and other proximal ACE attributable outcomes, we can create plans that reduce the barriers to entry with respects to cost and effort for other neighborhoods throughout the city as the project scales. Similar to what we saw with the Family Policy Council, we are building capacity for these measurements to have a secondary analysis with regard to the direct and indirect economic benefits of this work, which will enable us to develop a model that informs the city of the return on investments for this work. This will allow the long-term sustainability and scalability of this program without needing new appropriations each year, but if successful, will create its own revolving fund to invest in the continued development of community capacity. While we expect that this return on investment would pay for itself within about a decade or so, at the generational markers, 25 to 30 years and 50 to 60 years and so on, as children are born to parents who were born during this work of reducing ACE prevalence, we anticipate exponential jumps on the return on investment, which creates transformative opportunities for the city. We believe that as the social and economic outcomes grow, it will create excitement and greater engagement, not just throughout the city, but also to other cities as Philadelphia's success becomes a model elsewhere. I'm going to quickly skip over this slide and we'll give credit to the many sources cited in this presentation. I share this to show how the work we have developed throughout this series can come together as we develop our plans to inform a presentation, which I have also written into a policy memo, as different forms of work are necessary for different contexts. Those are my plans, and now we would love for you to connect to develop and share yours with others. So, we will have a chance to either discuss the plans we are thinking about to move our advocacy along, or take this time to do some independent reflection and research to develop a plan of action for ourselves in the year ahead. Unlike prior breakout rooms, there is not a worksheet for developing this plan. It can look like a timeline. It can be key bullet points of things that you want to achieve. It can just be open process right now, or a presentation, or perhaps artwork, whatever makes the most sense to you. There should not be an expectation of developing an entire plan in this call, but beginning to think about this and continuing reflection is a great step as we near the end of the year. If you know what you want to do and you create an entire plan on this call, that's wonderful, but you shouldn't feel pressured to have a full plan necessarily today. Our hope for you all is that you begin to process and think through what is feasible, how you can bring together the many different parts of our journey together over the last 4 months, and what you want to accomplish in 2025 and beyond as it relates to your advocacy. In breakout rooms, we hope that you will find value in connecting with and learning from others and be able to glean insights that you can include in your own plans, as well as get support through external process. For those of you who will use this time for internal reflection, we hope that this space provides you with the inspiration to at least begin the process of creating a plan of action for your work in the year ahead. And if you need anything, know that we will be here in the main room to help out, whether that's a question or if there's an issue in a breakout room. Either way, we are excited to hear what you come up with when we all get back together. Before we start, a quick reminder about community agreements before we hop into our breakout rooms. As the community agreements outline, we want to create a judgment-free environment. We are all getting started, and so do not worry about needing to be perfect. This is an opportunity for us to practice and process. As listeners, please try not to interrupt anyone who is sharing their ideas. And when you are sharing, please be mindful of time so that everyone who wants to has the opportunity to share, and it creates more opportunity for connection in the breakouts. The community agreements on this slide are all the same as before, but we want to ensure that we are creating conditions of empowerment and safety for everyone to do the work that we are doing together today. So I am going to go ahead and stop sharing the screen. We are going to do breakout rooms for 15 minutes right now, and we're going to let you all choose your own rooms if you want. Be mindful. Let's try to keep breakout rooms somewhere in the 3 to 5 ballpark. One time we had like everybody join one breakout room. And so when you all choose your own breakout rooms, that is something that can happen. And we will come back together. We'll close out, and then we will go through this as a group. So I'm opening the breakout rooms now for folks who want to go in and connect with one another. And for those who want to do independent reflection, I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording for the time being, and we'll be here for all of you. So our plan for 2025 CTIPP CAN calls is to move from more pedagogical to more andragogical, from a lot of me presenting to a lot of you all connecting. We know how valuable creating space for connection, peer support, and learning can be, and believe that after 4 months of creating plans for advocacy in 2025, the best support that we can provide is to now promote connection and support as actions on these plans driving forward. There will be other presentations outside of CTIPP CAN, but in terms of our presenting, we want to share 2 additional things. First, we will use the beginning of CTIPP CAN calls still to provide updates on the federal policies that we are focused on advocating on, as we need all of your support to drive those forward, as well as other relevant efforts with respect to agencies and other wins that emerge. And additionally, we are going to consolidate these 4 sessions into a single session, or perhaps 2, that does not take as long for future advocates to go through this process that we have been practicing over the last 4 months. I understand if this is upsetting for any participant or participants who have been with us for the last 4 months to know that there will now be a shorter option, but please know that this development is only possible because of your participation and feedback throughout the development of this series. We are grateful for everyone who has participated in this first run through of the series and provided feedback that has helped us continue to develop its progress to the point where it is now. More will come on the plans for that, but know that CTIPP CAN will continue to be on the 3rd Wednesday of the month from 2 to 3:30 Eastern Time in the new year. The same link as always. And when there are special calls that we want to invite folks to, we will let you know about those as well in our newsletter. Additionally, we have invested in new advocacy tools that can create electronic campaigns. In addition to supporting increasing our advocacy footprint around the Community Mental Wellness and Resilience Act and the Rise from Trauma Act and other administrative and legislative activities that we at CTIPP are leading in, it is our greatest hope that this tool will be able to be used by our network, all of you. This tool will enable us to scale up our current infrastructure around sign-on letters and outreach to offices, while also adding things like a text-to-take action feature, gamifying the process, providing more insight and support for you all as back-end users, and much more. Additionally, this creates an opportunity for advocates like you to create a campaign of your own using our site. We know that this software is expensive, and to provide opportunities for coalition partners within our network to leverage our investment is a part of the reason that we scaled up our software infrastructure the way that we did. As a note, because we're not trying to hide this, this also provides an opportunity for us to expand our network as advocates who take action on the trauma-informed advocacy in your campaigns would then enter into our database. But this will be available to those who are interested. In order to apply, we're going to need to ensure that the legislation and the process by which it is being used is aligned with our mission and vision, and we will share more about how to make this happen in the January CTIPP CAN call, as well as in blog posts that will come out in the newsletter and be available on our website. But know that if you have gone through this series, you will have all the information that you need in order to partner with us. If we have any concerns about the policy or the process, we will let you know and have discussions about that. Additionally, we have heard from a number of you that there have been requests throughout this series about a certificate of completion. We listened and we created one. You will see that there are questions from the core elements of what we worked on across all 4 sessions throughout this series to ensure that we know that you completed the series. If you went through this series and are interested in receiving a certificate, please fill out the Google form, the QR code. I believe that it was just put in the chat as well, and we will get back to you in about 5 business days. And finally, we wanted to share additional advocacy materials that are available for free on our website. I know I have referenced them throughout this series, but these materials go into great detail and provide asynchronous options to explore trauma-informed approaches to advocacy. The activities that we did and many others are throughout this series. The information in both is more or less the same between the book and the advocacy series, but we wanted to create different resources for different learning styles and are very excited to have published this ebook earlier this month. They also pair well together as the language is somewhat different, though the content is similar, so they can reinforce each other well. The links to both of these resources are being put in the chat, and we invite you to use and share these. The last link that is being put in the chat now, and our last request before we just connect, is to please provide feedback on today's call as well as the series as a whole, if you were able to join all of the sessions. With that, we thank you for your participation in this series from the bottom of our heart. Please don't hesitate to reach out with questions as you continue to move forward on your advocacy journeys. We are so looking forward to continuing this work together in the new year and to continue growing this movement. We are so excited to learn from you all as we continue moving forward. Thank you for the good work that you have done this year, and we look forward to more in the new year and many years to come. With that, I will take down my slides and look forward to hearing from you all about your plans for advocacy in 2025 and any other thoughts that are on your hearts and minds. We got everything in the, yes. Yay for the certificate. All right. How were breakout rooms? How was developing plans for folks, whether in the breakout rooms or that did independent reflection? How are we feeling as we start to get toward closing out this year of 2024?
Can I say something?
Please.
Okay, Jesse. So I think the breakouts are very, very helpful collectively as a group. One of the things that I'm finding is that there are so many of us that across the board are doing the same kind of work, you know, maybe a different agency. So this for me has been extremely beneficial, learning about other people and, you know, what they're doing in their programs and stuff. And then also too, you know, for me, when I go January up to Austin and I'm trying to figure out what I'm telling these people, this stuff here is helping me write my statements, write my pitch, if you will. So I really value what CTIPP has brought to the table. And I think it's been very, very helpful. So kudos to you.
Kudos to you. We appreciate that very, very much. Can't wait to hear about everything that takes place in Austin.
I'm nervous.
Understood. There will be this community of support that is here regardless of
Right.
how those meetings go, where we'll
We
be
hope so.
support.
We hope so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what else? And if folks want to share their plans specifically, please. It's all right. It's a lot to process.
Yeah. A lot of shy people.
Ah, a lot of
Yeah.
thoughtful engagement, I know. Um, are there any other thoughts for us as CTIP on the series as a whole? Questions about what I shared about quorum or as we're going into 2025? And if not, we can always have some time back in our schedules, which is never a bad thing. Right on. Well, we
Mm.
look forward. I'm happy to stay on for a little bit, but we can end the call here. I am so excited and hopeful about where this work will go in the new year. And that is in such a large part because of each of you. I mean, the heart that you bring to this work, the activity that you're bringing at the local, state, federal, and non-governmental levels in various ways to continue to inform and move the trauma-informed movement forward is so heartening. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart. And we look forward to continuing to connect in the new year and build upon the foundation that we've developed throughout this series and the network's growth over the last decade or so. And so with that, I wish you all a very happy end of the year. For those of you who the holidays are the happiest time of the year, I hope that this year is exceedingly joyous and loving. And for those of you, we know that for many of us, holidays are not such a happy time for a variety of reasons. Our hearts are also with you, and we hope that you enjoy the end of the year. And
Mhm.
either way, we look forward to being in 2025 together and send out a tremendous amount of love to each and every one of you. So thank you so much for your participation. It means the world, and we can't wait to continue in the year ahead.